When I was young, I remember there was a phrase people in my church used. They would say that you need to go to church because God's just asking for 1 hour a week from you. You can give God 1 hour a week, can't you? I was just a kid and that sounded reasonable. Until I grew up, and it didn't. Seriously. That was their view of God and of religion. How is that even remotely defendable? Well, let's talk about the sanctification of time now, shall we? Welcome to episode 23 of All Roads Lead to Rome, the podcast for Protestants and the non-religious that helps you understand Catholicism and helps you make the journey there in a way that is easier and more organized than I did. I'm Dr. Bickford, and in this episode we're going to talk about making time holy, more formally and officially known as the sanctification of time. And if you want to sanctify your time with me, then please hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player or on YouTube. Also, tell your Catholic curious friends about us. They need this more than they know. And don't make my producers start assigning quotas to me now. In the Catholic Church, the goal of life is to become holy. Doing so should factor into daily life, into all decisions, and in all of our actions. It's not an abstract concept. It's woven into the very fabric of our beings. We are not called to be people who just give God 1 hour a week. Our lives should instead move with the rhythm of faith and devotion. But from a practical standpoint, how do we do that? Well, it's through sanctifying time. Sanctifying means to make something sacred, to make it holy. The reason why we do this is to help us on our own journey of sanctification, our own journey of becoming holy. And there are a number of ways we do this. First is through the understanding of Catholic virtue ethics, where we consciously work to develop virtuous habits that bring a holy life. This was the subject of episodes 18 and 19. Next, we sanctify the day. Many Catholics pray when they first wake up in the morning or right before they go to bed at night. They might pray a novena. A novena is a 9-day series of prayers, reflecting on Scripture and asking God for a special grace, favor, or intention. They go for 9 days as a symbol of the 9 days that the apostles prayed between the ascension of Jesus and the arrival of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost. They may pray the Rosary and reflect on one of the sets of mysteries related to the life and work of Jesus. The Rosary was the subject of episode 13. They may pray something called the Lectio Divina, which is Latin for a sacred reading, which is a reflective way of meditating on a passage of the Bible. I am a member of the Order of Malta, and we have a daily prayer where we thank God for enlisting us into the order, and we ask for strength to do our work in a way that best serves the order and best serves God. Another type of prayer is called the Liturgy of the Hours, often referred to as the Breviary or the Divine Office or the Daily Office. This is the cycle of prayer used in monasteries and prayed by all nuns, deacons, priests, bishops, and a whole lot of lay people, and it's done every day. It's an answer to Paul's admonition in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, where he calls us to pray without ceasing. And the Liturgy of the Hours is based on a reading of almost the entire book of Psalms over a 30-day period. And you repeat that every month. Over the course of a year, it also covers almost all of the text of the Bible. And then it includes spiritual readings from great saints, documents from the church, and lots of prayer. It also marks the feast days of major saints, which include readings by them or about them. The daily office is broken down into the office of readings, called matins, morning prayer, called lauds, daytime prayer, which can be read all at once or divided into 3 parts, called terce, sextet, and non. Next comes evening prayer, called vespers, and then finally night prayer, called Compline. Though the daily office is required for religious people committed to religious life, the Catechism of the Catholic Church encourages everyone to pray it. In paragraph 1174, it says, "The Liturgy of the Hours is intended to become the prayer of the whole people of God. It's described as the prayer which Christ himself, together with his body, addresses the Father." End quote. When I was a Protestant pastor, I went to a Catholic shrine for spiritual direction. That may not be something you're familiar with. When people need help with their psychological or emotional state, they'll go for therapy and get help and healing. Spiritual direction is very different. Spiritual direction is you meet with a spiritual director to work on deepening your spiritual life and your prayer life. And so I went to a Catholic shrine and met with a spiritual director every month. Well, one of the brothers there died, and my director gave me 2 of the brother's 4-volume set of the Liturgy of the Hours that he had used in his own daily prayer. I had no idea how to use it, but these were the books that a holy man used in his prayers for years, if not decades. These 2 volumes became like a sacred relic to me. And I always had them in a special place in my office at each of the different churches I had worked at over my career. I cherished them, even though I never used them and didn't even know how to use them. But in the mid-2000s, 16 years before I actively started to become a Catholic, I started to feel the tug to learn the daily office and to pray it myself. Now, learning it is no small task. It is a complicated system. But I used resources from the internet and was able to teach myself, and it very quickly became the cornerstone of my daily prayer. None of my colleagues understood why I did it, and none of my parishioners cared that I did it. Well, that was 20 years ago, and I still prayed every day. In a monastery, the prayer is formed the center of the day, and then you engage in work when you're not praying. I've never developed that much discipline, but I bring my book with me every day. And when I have quiet moments, I pray the office. And if I start to fall behind, I will pray 2 or 3 of them at a time until I catch up. I never skip them. My book goes with me to work, it goes with me on trips, and it goes with me on vacation. I never miss my prayer time. And for me, the most touching prayer in the entire 4-week cycle is the one on Thursday afternoon in week 4 after we read Psalm 129. I'll leave it you to find it. It's powerful. The 2 volumes that I have from the monk are still treasured relics for me, but my active prayer comes from my own 4-volume complete set. But interestingly, when each of my children moved away for school, I gave them each 1 worn-out volume of mine to keep as a relic from me, and then I would replace it in my own prayer. One of my 3 children has adopted the practice of praying it, and now has a full 4-volume set of his own. I'm not sure what the other 2 do with it, but I know they still have the volume I gave them. Each day can be made holy. And when you do so, how you look at your work, your interactions with people, and your understanding of the world, all of these will change. And it happens because you are being made more holy. The next episode in the podcast after this one will be dedicated to prayer, and we'll explore this more deeply. But that is all just sanctifying the day. The sanctification of time goes far beyond that. We sanctify the year through something called liturgical seasons. We actually mark a series of seasons during the year. They're not dictated by the changing weather, but by the life and death of Christ. And do you know when the church's new year is? It begins with the first Sunday in Advent, which is typically the last Sunday in November or the first Sunday in December. Advent goes through the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. And the reason for this being the beginning of the new year is simple. Even though it didn't always know this, the world was always waiting for the birth of Christ. And Advent is a season of waiting. It is also a season of waiting for the second coming of Christ that will usher in God's kingdom in the world. The primary colors you'll see in church in Advent are blue or purple. Local tradition or church resources may dictate which of the two colors is used in a particular parish. The first Sunday of Advent often has a theme of hope. The second Sunday is a theme of peace. The third Sunday is a theme of joy. And the fourth Sunday is a theme of love. Advent wreaths are very common, and there's a candle lit each week to mark the week you're in. And then there's a white candle in the middle that gets lit on Christmas. The candle for the third Sunday is pink, and it's called Gaudete Sunday, and that is Latin for rejoice. And if the church has the resources, the clergy will wear pink as well, although they may get touchy about that and call the color rose instead. And I found it best to let them have that one. And there's a reason why we have that Rose Sunday. In the early church, Advent had more of a penitential mood to it. Instead of celebrating the coming of Jesus, the focus was more on properly preparing ourselves for his coming, and the assumption was always that we did not have our lives in order. So for both Advent and Lent, there was, and still is, a Sunday where we would lighten up that penitential mood for that Sunday and celebrate a bit more. And that's what Gaudete Sunday is. But since Advent isn't so penitential today, its effect isn't so strong. But we still keep that Sunday. The peak of the season arrives on Christmas Day. But Christmas isn't just one day. We celebrate it until Epiphany on January 6th. So when we sing the song, the 12 Days of Christmas, Christmas is the first day, and Epiphany is the 12th day of Christmas. And Epiphany marks the visit of the three wise men to the baby Jesus. The liturgical color for Christmas is white, to represent the purity of Jesus. You will then notice that after Epiphany, the colors in the church and the colors that the clergy wear then change. And it's because we've finished the Advent season and the Christmas season, and we now have nothing specific to focus on. So we go into a season called ordinary time. The color of ordinary time is green to symbolize growth. And we go through ordinary time for a little bit between Epiphany and Ash Wednesday, and then we go through a very long ordinary time between Pentecost and the start of next Advent. And as I just said, the shorter ordinary time ends Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is a day of deep reflection. We wear ashes on our foreheads to remember our mortality, and we go from that to a whole season of reflection, of penance, and of self-sacrifice as we prepare for the death and resurrection of Jesus. And we call it Lent. Lent goes for 40 days, but interestingly, the Sundays in Lent do not count as part of the 40. They're seen as a break from the discipline. So during the season of Lent, people will engage in prayer more intensely. They will commit to attending daily Mass, or many will make sacrifices like giving up certain foods or entertainment or personal practices that they like. This act of denial is offered to God and serves as a reminder of the spiritual intensity of the season. Oh, and do you want a fun fact? There's a very long history of fasting in the church, and not eating meat on Fridays has been a part of that. In the older tradition, it was every Friday throughout the year. Nowadays, it's more just a part of the observance of Lent. Well, have you ever wondered why McDonald's sells a fish sandwich? Were they a burger place? It's because they lost their whole Catholic client base every Friday, and they needed a way to get them back, so they introduced a fish sandwich, and it apparently has worked. The color of Lent is purple because it's the color of royalty. And we say that the peak of the season is when our King goes up to his throne. But The throne for Jesus is the cross. On the fourth Sunday of Lent, the color is pink. It's rose, to mark Laetare Sunday, which serves as the same break as Gaudete Sunday does in Advent. But in Lent, it's more clear because you've got that strong penitential mood throughout Lent. And all of that sacrifice, all of that intensity is meant to prepare us for the sacred Paschal Triduum. Triduum is spelled Triduum. The only word I've ever known with two U's in it, back to back. The Triduum is a 3-day period, as the name hints at, and it covers Good Friday, the Easter Vigil of Saturday, and Easter itself on Sunday. The Masses during the Triduum, these 3 days, all mark a single event. So we don't go to a Good Friday Mass or an Easter Vigil or Easter Sunday. It's actually all three are part of a continuous marking of the crucifixion, burial, and then resurrection of Christ. When I worked in a church as a Protestant, one of my pet peeves was always to see so many people come to church on Palm Sunday and celebrate the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem, and then go home, and then come back a week later to celebrate the resurrection on Easter, and you have 2 Sundays of partying in a row without any real consideration or participation in what happens in between. And I'd always try to point out that the joy of Easter makes very little sense without the pain and horror of Good Friday, and with the quiet emptiness of Saturday. That's why the Triduum is all one event. On Palm Sunday and Good Friday, the liturgical color is red. On Easter, the color is white, representing that Christ is the light of the world. We don't celebrate Easter for 1 day. We go into a 50-day celebration of Easter, which takes us to Pentecost, which is described in Acts 2 when the Holy Spirit descends onto the disciples, and the color of Pentecost is red to mark the fire of the Holy Spirit that descends upon them. After Pentecost, which is usually sometime in May or June, we go back to ordinary time. And this will continue until the next Advent in late November, early December. So this is a very long period, and the color of that season is green. Now, to be honest, the liturgical calendar is more complicated than this, and it gets very intricate. But if you get what I've described here, you're way ahead of most people. Some folks will go very deep into the minutiae of the liturgical year, and I can assure you that for them, this episode will be found wanting. However, my goal is just to provide an introduction to a truly fascinating aspect of church life, and not have you get lost in the fine print. Other people will go to church Sunday after Sunday, see the different colors, and not fully get how it all connects together. So my goal is for you to at least have a basic understanding of it. But with that said, there are a few more things you need to know. The first is something called the lectionary. Have you ever heard of this? The lectionary is the sequence of readings that are used in church every week. Now, if you come from a Protestant background, your church may have used whatever reading the pastor wanted to use each week to fit what he or she wanted to say. I grew up in a church like that. We would get the parable of the Good Samaritan at least a half dozen times a year because my pastor really liked that. And there were whole swaths of the Bible that were never mentioned. That's one method. Another method for picking the readings on a Sunday is for the pastor to develop a sermon series. A series of Sundays, anywhere from 4 weeks up to 12 weeks, maybe even longer. And they would focus on a particular topic. And they would use Bible readings that fit with that theme throughout the series. And I'll admit, in my time as a pastor, there were times I would do sermon series. The third option for choosing readings is to use the lectionary. Now, the Catholic lectionary has a 3-year cycle called Year A, Year B, and Year C. And the year starts at the church's New Year. When is that? If you're paying attention, you know, first Sunday of Advent. So if you attend church every Sunday for all 3 years, you'll hear almost the entire Bible read in that time. There's always an Old Testament reading, a psalm, which is either chanted or sung, a New Testament reading, and a gospel reading. You can go back to episode 7 of the Mass and learn more about how the readings are done in the Catholic Church. All Catholic churches follow the lectionary. So the priest or deacon will preach on the readings assigned and can't really choose what is being read. There's a Protestant modification to the lectionary. So you may have Protestant friends who hear the same readings on Sunday that you do in a Catholic church. So that's the lectionary. We also celebrate feast days for various saints. These are days meant for us to remember the life, work, sacrifice, and often the death of various saints. Every April, on the feast of St. Catherine of Siena, she spends the day with me in my mind because her story is so astounding. The same happens for 2 days in a row in August, when we mark the feast of St. Augustine and the feast of his mother, St. Monica, which is the day before. These two saints are very special to me as well, and there are many others. The saints are remembered because they are our role models. They are the ones who have achieved the holiness that we all strive for. In a way, you could say they're the ones that make up the Hall of Fame of the Church. Another important point about making time holy is to remember that Mass attendance is mandatory for Roman Catholics. You cannot miss going to Mass. It's required because it's the most basic act of faith. If we can't get that much done, then we're not able to seriously consider ourselves to be Catholics. And so if you're on vacation, you go to Mass. If you're on a business trip, you go to Mass, and I've done so. Actually, I kind of like exploring and visiting new churches. But there are also other Masses that you're required to attend. And these are called Holy Days of Obligation. The Holy Days of Obligation are considered to be the most important days of the year on the Christian calendar. And it's vitally important that we attend Mass to pray and reflect on those days. And there are 6 Holy Days of Obligation that you need to know. And when they fall during the week, there's often an option for going to a Mass during the day or an option for going to a Mass during the evening. The 6 days are January 1st, to mark the solemnity of Mary, the Mother of God. There's something very good about starting the calendar year with a Mass to mark the one from whom Jesus came. The second is the Ascension of the Lord, which comes 40 days after Easter. Because Easter is always on a Sunday, the Ascension is always on a Thursday. And that's due to some math doing its mathing thing. The third Holy Day of Obligation is the Assumption of Mary, which happens on August 15th. If you want to understand the Assumption, I recommend you listen to episode 4, which is on Mary. The fourth of the 6 days is November 1st, the Solemnity of All Saints, more commonly known as All Saints' Day. It's the day we honor all the saints of the Church, because they are what we aspire to in life. They're the model for holiness. They are the ones in the Hall of Fame. The 5th day is December 8th, which is the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, the day the Church believes Mary was conceived immaculately, meaning free from original sin. We mark it on December 8th because the Church has always marked her birth on September 8th. And then finally, do you know when the 6th day is? It's Christmas Day. Christmas, as a Holy Day of Obligation, came as a bit of a surprise to me when I became Catholic. Again, when I worked in a church, the late service on Christmas Eve was the last one. And I'd always get home at 1 or 2 in the morning exhausted. And oddly, as a Protestant, I never thought about having a church service on Christmas Day. Mainly, probably because I and my colleagues assumed that no one would come. It was a family day. But for Catholics, we celebrate the birth of Jesus on his birthday, not just the night before. So those are the 6 days of 6 holy days of obligation. And Catholics see them as the days that we are required to attend Mass to mark them appropriately. These are the most basic things you do as a Christian. The Church takes them very seriously. In fact, in paragraph 2181 of the Catechism, we read, quote, "Those who deliberately fail this obligation commit a grave sin, unless excused for serious reason, such as illness or care for infants," end quote. Now, you may chafe at the idea of me telling you there are requirements. If you do, that's worth reflecting on. I did so early on. I chafed at it and realized that it was my stubborn streak of independence. That I didn't want to be told what to do. But I see the need. You may also chafe at the complexity of all of this. Why does the church go through all of this when it isn't commanded by the Bible? Well, celebrating the birth of Christ isn't required by the Bible, but we all do that. Well, all except for the Jehovah's Witnesses. We celebrate Easter. We celebrate lots of things. The church makes it more intentional that we're marking all the time, not just certain special moments. The practice of observing liturgical seasons exists to make time holy, to help us focus and not just go through the same repetitive stuff over and over. And it brings more beauty into the experience of daily life. And let's be honest, our world seems to be running short on beauty. So, what will be on the test? God does not ask for an hour a week. He calls us to give everything. We are called to build a holy life. We make each day holy through holy living and through prayer. We make each season holy by marking the life and death of Jesus. We celebrate the saints for their faith and their sacrifices. At times, we are solemn, and at times, we celebrate. All of it contributes to our growing holiness. And no matter what your experience has been before, please know that the road you are already on is the one that will lead to Rome. Why is that? It is because all roads lead to Rome.